It may sound like a broken record to assert that humanity in general has experienced a great deal of suffering. This is not surprising if we assume that suffering almost always accompanies life. But in some respects, it could be argued that we have endured more than other animals thanks to our own ingenuity, so to speak. And this issue of suffering and wretchedness is not unique to us, modern humans. Rather, it extends or has extended to all human beings, that is, all species of the genus Homo that, sadly, have gone missing along the way. Although there is no consensus on the total number, it seems that there were about 14 species of Homo that ever existed, all except us. They appeared and disappeared over the past 2.8 million years. We, Homo sapiens, have existed for about 300,000 years of that. This overall seems like a long time, but when compared to the nearly 3 million years of the genus Homo, one realizes that it is actually not that long. And when you think about how long 3 million years is, you can begin to imagine how different the world of our ancestors and ancient relatives was. This entails different experiences, different pains, and different deaths, some of which simply cannot be replicated today, and not only because what killed them no longer exists, but also because it sometimes involves unrepeatable achievements, as we will see in this first specimen, now the oldest known murder victim. This skull may look a bit like yours or mine, but it is not, because it does not belong to sapiens, but to Homo heidelbergensis, an ancient human species or subspecies that lived during the Middle Pleistocene. And if it wasn't clear, this particular individual has or had two major problems: large holes in the skull. For the researchers who found this unfortunate creature in a cave in Spain, it was clear that those holes killed it quickly, causing catastrophic damage to the brain. The question is, what caused them? Because caves are sloped and in many cases have sharp edges. Scientists initially thought that this heidelbergensis had fallen and a sharp rock had pierced its skull. But if so, you wouldn't expect to find two identical holes, which makes that scenario unlikely. Furthermore, no animals in Spain at that time caused such wounds. However, there is one thing that looks quite similar: damage caused by human tools, which anthropologists know very well. Specifically, the marks are very similar to those left by stone axes. Capable of causing severe trauma, this suggests that this person was murdered. And since this happened about 430,000 years ago, it is now considered the oldest known murder. That shows that violence has been part of our history, even before we existed, and, surprise, this heidelbergensis did not die alone. Thousands of other Homo bones were also found in the cave, some with similar signs of being struck, although none as ancient as this individual. In particular, the current hypothesis suggests that this cave may be one of the oldest examples of a designated burial site, where they discarded the bodies of those who died from various causes, whether violent or not. In the case of our unfortunate friend, that initial violence may have been the result of a struggle over resources or territory that ended in his death. A terrible way to go, though perhaps better than what happened to another individual nicknamed OH7. He is not heidelbergensis, but Homo habilis, one of the oldest human species living in East and South Africa. Moreover, they were among the smallest people ever to exist, with individuals only about 1.2 meters tall. This made them very fragile and made life difficult from the start. But in the case of OH7, life, or rather death, not only difficult, but also completely unfair. That is another example of a death that cannot be replicated. Not because it was the first to do something, but because it was killed by animals that no longer exist. This specimen, when alive, lived in an ancient swamp teeming with predators, and it seems that one day while drinking water, it was attacked by the worst thing one could encounter, a giant crocodile. And not just any crocodile, but the largest crocodile species ever to exist. Crocodilus torbjornsoni, now extinct, could reach up to 7.6 meters and weigh over 2 tons. A very uneven fight for our small ancient relative. It seems the crocodile ambushed OH7. It tried to turn around, but was caught at the last second. Its left leg had very large bite marks, also missing entire parts of the leg, possibly torn off. That, in a swamp, was a death sentence, even if not dying from blood loss. And Mother Nature still decided that wasn't punishment enough, because in one of the rarest known cases, it seems afterward it was attacked by a second completely different predator, A feline, specifically the size of a leopard. This doesn't necessarily mean a leopard completed the deadly duo, but what attacked it clung tightly to the back of its head, leaving long grooves on the parietal bones, matching the attack pattern of a leopard or another close member of the genus Panthera. And if it wasn't clear, sadly, OH7 died, because the marks on both head and leg show no signs of healing. However, technically it's possible it died first from the crocodile attack and then was scavenged by the feline. But since the crocodile only took one leg and the feline attack occurred in predatory behavior areas, some believe it was indeed a double attack. It is thought that after the crocodile attack, OH7 may have turned to face it, leaving its back completely exposed to the nearby cat, which sealed its fate, if you were wondering. Even today, many times crocodiles and felines have been observed competing over prey, but fortunately, it no longer involves extinct felines and giant crocodiles. Its death must have been terrible, but remember that a violent death is not always the worst. For example, look at the case identified as KNM-ER18081, a 1.7 million-year-old Homo erectus from Kenya, with a serious problem related to A, not the letter but vitamin A. Although essential, excess can be lethal, and that seems to be what killed it. Believe me, that's not a nice way to die, and its partial skeleton was found in 1974, and scientists immediately noticed something strange. Its bones showed abnormal growth, excessive bone remodeling, and signs of massive prolonged bleeding, despite no obvious wounds. Sounds puzzling, but to researchers it was quite clear. The patterns matched hypervitaminosis A, that is to say, vitamin A excess, a condition well known in both ancient and modern times. This erectus is by far the oldest recorded case in humans. The patterns on its bones show it suffered from this condition chronically, and it ultimately killed it. Although today it is usually not a dangerous condition, perhaps due to lack of medical knowledge at the time. It consumed too much vitamin A unknowingly. This, along with bone problems, may have caused weakness, headaches, skin peeling, hair and tooth loss, and severe joint pain. These pains manifested in her limbs with pathological bone growth. Perhaps she had been suffering from these issues for a long time, raising the question, where did she get all that vitamin A? And all signs pointed to one main suspect, the liver of carnivorous animals, a well-known source of vitamin A in some current predators such as polar bears. Their livers can store so much that theoretically they could provide the vitamin A needed for a person for 150 years. Who knows? Perhaps this was the key to her tragedy. Perhaps not as painful as this ending, but certainly a terrible prehistoric death. At least it sounds as horrifying as the death of the town boy 2.8 million years ago. Nowadays, if something frightens us, we often frantically search around or underwater, but almost never look up at the sky. However, a long time ago you probably had to, because large birds of prey soaring in the sky terrorized Africa, not hesitating to attack humans, or rather hominids, like this unfortunate Australopithecus. And although this breaks the rule of only Homo, I mention it because of the anomaly of the case. Because the town boy was found with terrible wounds on his face and head, including puncture marks below the eye socket and deep scratches on the top of the skull, oddly enough. These injuries are almost identical to what some monkeys suffer from eagle attacks today. This suggests a large bird drove its beak and claws into the boy's eyes and head. Perhaps, and fortunately, it killed the boy instantly, before carrying him away to eat. But the story doesn't end here, because his death gave rise to a new mystery. You see, the town boy was just a skull, meaning the body was never found. Moreover, it was found in a remote area of the Kalahari Desert, in a cave where there were no other human or animal bones. This made researchers wonder how it got there, leading to the second hypothesis, that the bird used his skeleton to build its nest, until the head accidentally detached and rolled into a nearby cave, where it lay undisturbed for millions of years before being discovered. So after all this, I bet you won't look at birds the same way anymore. But the thing you might already be wary of is water, even though it's essential for life. It can also cause extreme discomfort, to put it mildly, because drowning is often considered one of the worst ways to die, a misfortune. This may have happened to an entire species, Homo erectus, or at least what remains of it. Erectus was one of the most successful human species in history, and in fact the longest lived, being the first to leave Africa and colonize Europe and Asia, where they would make their final stand. As far as we know, the most recent Homo erectus fossil, dating back about 110,000 years, comes from Java, and strangely, all died in a mass death event almost exactly 100 years ago. A group of researchers on the island found a burial site with more than a dozen erectus specimens, all adults and piled in one place, since there was no evidence of disease, no physical injuries or old age, so it was assumed they all died at the same time from a single cause. But exactly what could have happened based on the type of sediment where they were found? It is believed that a flood was partly responsible. It seems the bodies were carried by water to a narrow spot in the river, where they got stuck among logs. They formed a kind of corpse blockage that over time became fossilized. This doesn't mean they died in the flood, but that they were swept away by the water. However, it is still believed that they died from mass drowning, and some theories suggest that the cause was a volcanic eruption. This could cause a lahar, a mixture of rock and hot or cold water flowing down the volcano's slopes. They are violently destructive and often break riverbanks. We know today that these flows can cause massive destruction over wide areas. They can travel more than 100 kilometers and kill tens of thousands of people if a major volcanic lahar was what finished off the last erectus. It should be made clear that this would be one of the few fossils showing an extinction event in progress. The extinction of erectus was not directly caused by volcanic eruptions or floods. It is believed that in Java, their last populations began to disappear when their temperate forest habitat turned into tropical rainforest. And of course, there may still be more recent remains of erectus. But currently, these fossils are the latest known, which makes it even more tragic and also poetic. Unfortunately, there is nothing poetic about the next case. Only the brutality involving one of the worst animals you could be eaten by, the hyena, famous for eating prey alive and brutal bites tearing flesh while the body is still in agony. And we're not talking about modern hyenas, but an extinct giant species, Pachycrocuta, one of the largest hyenas ever to exist, with adults weighing over 150 kilograms, rivaling the size of a lioness. But their weight was not distributed like a lion's, as they had unusually large heads, with large bone markings indicating powerful muscles, allowing them to bite with tremendous force and do things like this. This is a Homo erectus skull from several 100,000 years ago, crushed by a Pachycrocuta, and not just one, because it is one of over 28 specimens found at the Peking Man site at Zhukudian, China. These individuals seem to have had a very bloody end. You may have heard of Peking Man, a supposed subspecies of Homo erectus found in a cave, but perhaps you didn't know that among the over 28 specimens found, about 67% show bite marks attributed to Pachycrocuta, and saying bites is an understatement. Body parts were found crushed or completely shattered, possibly in attempts to reach the nutritious marrow or even swallow whole bone pieces. Given the condition of the skeletons, I can say they were quite successful at that time due to the extent of damage and the finding of human tools. It was once thought that Peking Man lived in this cave, and they were murderous cannibals terrorizing the area. However, when carefully analyzing all the skeletons, including non-human ones, it is clear that hyenas were behind this symphony of death. The idea is that this cave was a lair of Pachycrocuta, and at other times, after being abandoned, it was also used by humans. This explains the tools, while also showing how terrible the hyena attacks were. This site is also a reminder that we should not take our status as apex predators for granted, because although erectus were skilled hunters and competitors to other carnivores, in prehistoric China, they were not at the top of the food chain. That position belonged to Pachycrocuta. Many human bones show signs of damage by Pachycrocuta, but no signs of the opposite. And let's be honest, you can't do much against a hyena the size of a lioness, even if you have a spear. It must be said that there is a theory that for a long time, hyenas prevented humans from expanding into certain areas. And even beyond Pachycrocuta, we know many cases of hyenas attacking humans, even in modern times, because sometimes they become man-eaters, making one grateful not to have to worry, at least about giant hyenas. And another thing you no longer have to worry about is not having a toothbrush. Seems like no big deal. Tell that to the Turkana boy or KNMWT 15000, another unlucky Homo erectus. But unlike the Peking man, this specimen did not live in Asia, but in Kenya, Africa, and he lived much earlier, dated between 1.5 and 1.6 million years ago. At that time, erectus had already created sophisticated tools and may even have partially mastered fire. But what is clear is that they hadn't discovered oral hygiene, because the Turkana boy had no catastrophic injuries. Rather, an interesting oral pathology, specifically signs of a painful abscess. After his baby teeth fell out and his molars and premolars grew in irregularly, these teeth collided with each other, creating great pressure leading to infection and an abscess that never healed, suggesting he died young from it at around 8 or 9 years old. And with what we know today about oral infections, it is believed that sepsis killed him, a serious condition that occurs when bacteria or their toxins enter the bloodstream. That is, sepsis that even today is difficult to treat. And back then, it was almost certainly a death sentence. According to where he was found, it is thought that at some point during his illness, he fell face first to the ground while crossing a swamp and couldn't get up due to weakness from the disease. And he died floating face down in muddy water. And sometimes it seems the universe is too cruel to some people because he couldn't even die in peace. Because some researchers believe that after death, a passing herd of animals sank his body to the bottom of the swamp, deep enough to fossilize, and then part of his skeleton became trapped in layers of volcanic ash after a local eruption, forming a grave that preserved him for over 1 million years. And according to some, all this bad stuff wasn't even the end of his list of problems. Because at one time, it was thought that the Turkana boy had a congenital condition such as dwarfism or scoliosis, because his ribs appeared misaligned with his spine. But over the years, and with technological advances, it was suggested that perhaps that was not the case for him, although it remains a possibility. But in more recent analysis, it was discovered that he definitely had a severe herniated disc, so dislocated that, with the lack of treatment at the time, it could have been a second death sentence. That is, if the oral infection didn't kill him, the herniation would, leaving him virtually immobile and defenseless against any predator. It makes you realize that today's first world problems were often death sentences in the past. What a way to open one's eyes. Thank you for watching this video, and if you like, see you next time on this channel.